And a man came up to me and shared with me his own history of abuse and how on a weekly basis his mother and father beat him to the point that his body was scarred. And he said, I really want to connect. I really want to connect to Jesus. I want to find a church home, but I can't so much as drive past the church without having shivers of fear. Where do I turn? What can I do?
I can make it through the day.
The church should be a place where survivors and hurting people are running towards and not fleeing.
Because the belonging bring our brain system the safety. We need a safety everywhere.
Spanning a range of so many denominations, of so many Christian communities, and thinking about how even 20 years ago these conversations weren't happening at this level, to this amount of publicity, and just noticing that I think we're only going to be talking more about it, which means that we're only going to be, hopefully, hearing more truth, seeing more light, and hopefully seeing more courage in the process.
Thanks everyone for joining with us tonight. My name is Pete Singer. I'm the Executive Director here at Grace, and I have the honor of being joined by our incredible board of directors, people that carry with them so much wisdom, so much experience, and so much insight. It is a privilege and it's an honor to work with each of them. And tonight, you'll get a chance to hear a little bit from each of them as well. Things that give them hope, things that inspire them. Sometimes in this work that we're in, it can be disheartening. So what gives them hope? And we'll get to hear some of that hope tonight. Hope is really important in this work. And if you want to learn more about the work of Grace, then please do visit our webpage at netgrace.org. Hope is really important because this work can be discouraging. This work can be overwhelming. There are so many types of abuse out there. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's sexual harassment, there's abuse of power. All across the lifespan, almost any form of abuse that you can imagine, unfortunately, happens in the church. And this gets to be very discouraging. At times, it's a heavy weight that we carry. But despite that, there is hope. A lot of the hope, in my mind, comes from an understanding even what is the nature of trauma, right? Because when we're trying to help a church recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse, we're trying to help a church do a better job in how they are handling and responding to trauma. So what does SAMHSA say about trauma? And it's amazing, because I will let you know also that even though these are the things that SAMHSA says about trauma, whether SAMHSA intended it or not, SAMHSA aligns with Scripture. Scripture gets trauma. So we look at trauma and we see that there are actually three parts of trauma. A lot of times when we think about trauma, we think about the event that has happened. We think about the assault that has occurred. We think about the abuse. We think about the natural disaster. We think about this thing that has happened. And if that's all that trauma is, that's actually very discouraging. Because it's true that a lot of people are abused in the church, but it's also true that a lot of people are abused before they get to church. And what do we do then? And if trauma just involved the event, there would not be a lot of hope. But it's not just the event. It is 100% true. Churches need to do a better job. Churches need to do all that they can to prevent events from happening in the first place, to prevent the abuse, to prevent the assault from happening in the first place. Churches need to step up and do more to prevent this from happening, regardless of where the person is in the lifespan. But there's more to trauma than just the event. Part of trauma is how that event is experienced. Does a person who has to go through an event, who's going through an event, do they experience it alone or surrounded by community? Do they experience it loved unconditionally? Or do they experience it blamed and held responsible? Do they experience the arms of the church wrapped around them, representing the arms of Christ wrapped around them? Or do they experience it condemned because you can't forgive quickly enough? Trauma isn't just the event, but it's how the event is experienced. And I've spoken with many survivors who tell me the event, the abuse was terrible, but how the church responded was even worse. We have the opportunity to do all that we can to prevent the event. Scripture has called us to prevent the event. But if that event occurred before we came on the scene, we can enter into the experience of the event. There's the event itself. There's the experience of the event. And there's the ongoing effects of the event. So many times after a person has been abused, whether that's abused as an elder, abused as a child, abused at any point throughout their lifespan, that person feels that they are to blame. They may feel that they're to blame and they may lose their entire community. I've had people share with me, we tried to leave the church, but we can't because all of our friends are there. All of the people that we have worshiped with for years are there. But sometimes a person loses that community. A person who may have been abused, a person who has received that harm, whether it's from the faith community or from someone outside the faith community, may lose their whole community. And in so doing, they have ongoing effects. The ongoing effects could be physical. The ongoing effects could be emotional and psychological. The ongoing effects could be financial and occupational or educational. The effects from the abuse continue on. But once again, we are called to enter in and play a role as those events develop. Play a role doing whatever we can to prevent the event from occurring. But if we cannot prevent that event from occurring, to enter into the experience of the event and to enter into the effects of the event in a person's life who's experienced harm through abuse. For me, this is hope. When somebody calls up Grace, they'll call up Grace many times because they're trying to prevent abuse from happening. They're trying to prevent an event from occurring in the first place. And we will gladly walk alongside a person to try and prevent abuse from happening. Gladly walk alongside a church to try and prevent an event from happening. but so often they're calling us up asking for advice about what to do after the event has happened. They're calling us up for an investigation after the abuse has occurred. And if I thought that all that was involved in the trauma was the event, I would be really without hope. But when I see and I recognize that how we respond as grace, how we respond as churches, how we respond as Christians, how we respond as people, actually is entering into the experience, actually is entering into the ongoing effects, then I have hope. Because I realize that not only are we entering into the experience, not only are we entering into the effects, hopefully we are able to prevent much of the abuse from happening in the first place. But when we enter into these things, we have the potential to actually change the nature of trauma in a person's life. And this is an amazing, amazing thing that we are called to do, that grace is called to do, that the church is called to do, that all of us are called to do, to enter into the experience, to enter into the effects, and in so doing have the potential to change the very nature of trauma in a person's life. And this is hope. Everyone that's on our board has seen hopeless situations that appeared to be without hope. But they have also seen situations where out of the darkness, out of the ashes, there does arise some hope. And our board members have asked to share some of those stories of hope with us tonight. And I am excited to hear, in the midst of this heaviness, where do they find hope? We'll start with Betty, one of our newest board members. Betty has as her focus elder abuse, and she's been on our board for a number of months here at Grace. Betty, in the midst of this darkness, where do you find hope? I can't hear you, Betty.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Thanks, Betty. Oh, now I lost you again.
From Tyler, Texas. And I find hope in knowing that grace exists. I have been in this work for about 44 years. My dad was a pastor in East Texas. And what I know is that in working with older adults, that oftentimes they are the ones that are isolated, cognitively impaired, and as a result of no longer being visible in the community, no longer able to attend church services, that they are often victimized and then re-victimized under the auspices of thinking of forgiveness of those that have been harming these particular individuals. When I think of grace, the godly response to abuse in the Christian environment, and when I've learned of the work that happens in grace, from investigations to policy reviews to bringing about awareness, recognition, and response to abuse and trauma, it gives me hope. Oftentimes, older adults are those that are forgotten. They are forgotten because they're no longer visible in society. And often they are pitted children's issues against older issues, elderly issues. And so in these particular situations, when I look at the work of Grace Happen that is doing now, it is my prayer that in these particular situations that churches are made aware, they're educated on knowing the signs, symptoms, and resources for individuals that are parishioners and that can be helped through the work of grace. Um, my friend Victor V has done so much work to open my eyes when he gives the seminar, When Faith Hurts. And I've looked at situation. I've served as a direct practitioner in investigating abuse, neglect, or exploitation to serving as the commissioner of the state of Texas for long-term care services. And what we absolutely know is that oftentimes older adults are re-victimized during the investigative processes, and then when churches are made aware that these individuals are isolated, then oftentimes what is done and the resources, they have not known how to work in response to abuse and trauma, not only of older adults, but of children. So this is, in serving as a board member here, it is my hope that I have something to bring to the table. I ask of you to support the work of grace, that you support it by being aware and then financially contributing. This campaign that we are working on and initiating at this particular point in time is to avail resources and services and dollars, particularly to those rural churches or those churches who does not have the financial resources to engage in this particular work. Your contributions and resources can make a difference. Thank you so much for your participation here, and that we ask you to support and learn of the work of grace.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you so much. Scripture is very clear. Jesus calls out leaders of his time for elder abuse, for taking advantage, people who are widows, for those who are older and maybe not seen. So thank you for highlighting that work.
Thank you.
The next person who wants to share tonight is Victor Veith. Victor's a good friend of mine who also is in Minnesota. Victor, where do you find hope?
Thank you, Pete. Good to be with you. When I was a child abuse prosecutor, I walked into court one day with a girl who was sexually abused by her father. And when we went into court, she saw not one, but both of her Protestant ministers and half a dozen church elders. And she knew they weren't there that day to support her, but rather the father she accused of abusing her. So witnessing this spectacle, she tugged on my suit, whispered in my ear, "Does this mean that God is against me too?" When I worked for the National District Attorneys Association, I consulted on a case in California where a girl was sexually abused by her dad. And in the forensic interview, she said to the interviewer, "I'm just sort of wondering, I'm kind of wondering, could somebody help me understand, am I still a virgin in God's eyes?" A few years ago, I spoke at the Mayo Clinic about the incorporation of religion into the physical abuse of some children. And a man came up to me and shared with me his own history of abuse and how on a weekly basis his mother and father beat him to the point that his body was scarred. And he said, "I really want to connect. I really want to connect to Jesus. I want to find a church home, but I can't so much as drive past the church without having shivers of fear. Where do I turn? What can I do?" Each of these survivors, in their own way, were calling to us from the shadows of their life, saying, "Where is there hope? How do we build a church that is safe for us? How do we build a church where we could find spiritual healing?" And so I find hope, and many survivors I intersect with find hope in grace. What is the purpose of the Every Church Empowered campaign? It is dedicated to the proposition that we can say to survivors, yes, there is hope. The Child Safeguarding Campaign can build better churches, can help churches build better policies that are evidence-based. Through our case consultation, we can create churches that are trauma-informed. We can teach clergy how to conduct a trauma-informed Bible study or a sermon on issues of maltreatment. We can, through these and other efforts at Grace, demonstrate our faith by serving the least of these. On that proposition, Pete, gives me great hope. Thank you, everybody, for being part of tonight's event.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you. It highlights that hope isn't just something that would be nice to have. Hope is something that we need. Without hope, how do you even go on? And so that hope is important. That hope is absolutely essential. One of our board members who could not join us tonight is Justin Holcomb. Even though Justin could not join us, he did record a video earlier so that we could play it here tonight. Zane, do you want to go ahead and play Justin's video?
Hi, my name is Justin Holcomb, and I am the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Central Florida. I'm also a seminary professor, and I'm an author of books for hope and healing for survivors of abuse, but also children's books about prevention of sexual abuse. I've been a board member for Grace since 2011, and it is a great joy to serve on the board of Grace. It's an honor, and for a few reasons. One is that it's personal. Being a survivor of sexual abuse, knowing how shame works and the hope of the gospel and the comfort that comes from God's compassion for those that have suffered. But it's also because I married my wife, Lindsay. And when we were dating, she was the case manager for a domestic abuse shelter. And then right after we got married, she became a case manager for a sexual assault crisis center. So being married to an advocate who taught me, put it on my radar screen as a professor and as a pastor, it's a great joy to actually not only bring awareness, which is very important for the issue of abuse, but also what are tangible ways to accompany the awareness for hope and healing for survivors. And Grace has been a part of increasing and influencing the conversation for churches and Christian environments and ministries for the past few years. But I've been seeing, since its very beginning, actually, but I've been seeing the fruit of that more recently, where pastors are aware, church leaders are aware of how to prevent, recognize, and respond to abuse. And people's experience, survivors' experiences in church are more healthy. They're more Christ-centered, gospel-centered, grace-oriented, trauma-informed, and people are having better experiences addressing their own abuse or instances of abuse because of the work of Grace. We're not the only group, but Grace has been a major part of that change, and I am grateful for that. Of course, there is more to be done, but seeing a shift in people's experiences is a great encouragement. It's the reason why I've been continuing to serve with Grace for 12 years. And it's one of the most important things I do after being a husband, a dad, a bishop, and a professor. This is the other thing that I'm just all in on. I really appreciate Grace's investigations, which bring justice and healing to survivors, course correction, culture fits, policy development for churches after they've learned where they need to fix things, but also the every church empowered training and certification for churches to prevent abuse is just a hallmark of what Grace has done. So please join me and the other board members of Grace in our contribution. Please join me in financially contributing to Grace. We spend every dollar very well, and it's leveraged wonderfully for survivors and for churches to do the work that we're called to do. And I can promise you that your money will be spent well and for the cause, purpose, and mission of Grace, which is straight from the compassionate heart of God.
That was Justin, who's a member of our board, but was not able to be here tonight. Justin had a lot of great things to say about where there is hope for healing, hope for just being able to make sense of some of the abuse that a person may have experienced, some of the harm that could have come. Another person that brings really good insight into this and also can speak to where there is hope in the darkness is my friend Ray Douglas from New York. Ray.
Hi, Peyton. Um, well, I've found hope in the confirmation that grace provides, that when we take up this work, when we do it well, things actually get better. I suppose I could say on a more fundamental level, I find hope in the confirmation that it provides that as a Christian, I'm not crazy in actually thinking that this is one of the more vital things we have to do. I've been involved with Grace for about the past 3.5 years. I'm a Catholic. I'm sure I don't have to describe the problems we've been having with sexual offending among the clergy and finding non-horrible ways of responding to it. So I was tremendously impressed by the kind of work Grace was doing, increasingly frustrated by my own church's failure to take a leaf out of its book. In fact, I still am. But from my point of view, this is something that shouldn't or doesn't involve denominational differences. All Christian churches are confronting an identical problem. None of them has a record of which can be terribly proud. And all are not just invited, but required by Jesus himself to take this matter seriously. So when I was asked to join the board of this organization, it was a no-brainer, which is as well, because that more or less describes me. But it's also the kind of work that as a Christian, I don't think I have a right to refuse. Beyond that, my day job is as an academic historian. I write, teach, and publish about the past, including the history of sexual violence. And from where I sit, that's a moral enterprise as well as an intellectual one. Our duty is to tell the truth about what happened in the past as accurately, as objectively as we possibly can. And there's times when I think that, apart from its safeguarding role, which is, of course, our main focus this evening, that's probably the most valuable thing that Grace does. Yes, its investigations are intended to find out what went wrong in churches that have been affected by sexual violence and to help fix it. But from the standpoint of the victims, what Grace does ensures that the truth gets told rather than the narrative, that their narrative being controlled by the powerful. We're promised that the truth will set us free, and for victims of sexual violence in the church, that's exactly what Grace does. Pete?
Thanks, Ray. You had a lot of great wisdom for us. And I think it really just highlights that this isn't a Catholic issue, a Protestant issue. It doesn't matter. This is an issue that we as the whole church must deal with. It's not an option, as Ray described. It is a moral imperative. We have to do better. It's not optional. In the middle of all this, a voice has been rising up, and that voice has been rising up a lot in the Western United States. A pastor who has tried to help people see the intersection of faith and trauma, and the intersection of faith and the information that we know from adverse childhood experiences. And that voice is the voice of my friend Sang-Hoon Yu. Sang-Hoon, can you share with us, in this heavy work, where do you find hope?
All right. Thank you, Pete, and all amazing board members and participants to this event. I really appreciate you all, especially Grace. I just recently joined Grace with the friendship and invitation from Victor and Pete. And the more I spend time with the organization, I'm so feel honored and blessed. I have just a couple of minutes, so let me tell you that my perspective, because I'm Reverend Dr. Sehun Yu, and I'm in Arizona, and I founded Facebook City and also Arizona Trauma Informed Faith Coalition, and Pete and talk about the ACEs. So I'm heavily involved with the ACEs. We have an ACEs consortium in Arizona, and also PACES Connection as national hub with a lot of training and the movement. Well, it's interesting why I joined the board, because we are in the same direction, but actually we are completing each other. When we talk about abuse, we may think about just the people who got victimized and surviving or perpetrator. My focus is, I think, for my case, is that my work is actually, I'm dealing with the people who think I don't have anything to do with abuse. I don't have anything to do with trauma, because I'm focusing on the cultural change of the church to promote the belonging. And because the belonging bring our brain system the safety, we need a safety everywhere, not only for the victims and survivors. And with that, I found that there are differences and completing together. And actually, my fundraising title is the Belong and Respond and Empower. I see hope because we are working together. You know, one of the major problem is the silo of the system. And so I hoped we feel belong here together, although we are all different in many ways, even what is our field and where I'm in my professional field, but we see the bigger picture of a belonging together. At the same time, we have a lot of same and direction and things we do. One of the important things is that out of all this, the work of grace, we want to advocate for those who cannot talk, speak up for themselves. And for me, that in my work in the movement, the advocacy is very, very important. You know, Pete and Laura taught about trauma-informed care, and Pete also today talked about the 3E of the event, experience, and effect. One of the effect is that the victims become silenced. And when they are silenced, there's somebody who needs to speak up. I see that the role of the Holy Spirit of Jesus, because they spoke up for the victims and underprivileged and marginalized people. In that sense, grace is an amazing divine mission to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves instead of surrounded, oppressed by their own silenced and self-blame. So I just want to see that, you know, I'm working with a lot of victims and sexually trafficked survivors. And what they need is somebody who can acknowledge their pain and then speak for them. And in that sense, we are all in this together. And I hope you join to us. You don't have to do the real work, but there is a lot of ways, like today, if we can contribute whatever I can bring the resources and finances. I think although we are in different places, still we are working together in the same spirit, same vision, and same dream, where our survivors can speak for themselves with all our help. So that's what I see as an amazing vision and a hope for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sang-Hoon. It's been an honor to get to know you over the last couple of years and to call you a friend. Another person who has a great deal of wisdom and who has shared some of that wisdom with me and who truly understands the deep moral and ethical sides of this issue is Emmanuel. Emmanuel has been on our board for a long time, and during that time has seen a lot and has learned a lot. Emmanuel, do you want to share with us, where do you see hope?
Thank you, Pete. You know, I've been with Grace since the beginning. And when Boz, my nephew, asked me to join, I thought, why not? It can't hurt. There must be something good there. But then I was shocked by two things. I discovered the magnitude of the problem, and then I was inspired by the people of Grace, the board of Grace, the staff of Grace, the dedication, the professionalism, the depth. I've been inspired, and I'm still inspired today. So finding hope, where do you find hope in this world of abuse, destruction, emotional and spiritual, and sometimes physical life? So I find hope in people's courage in coming forward, despite the fear that they might not be believed, or worse, that they might be blamed or shamed. That courage gives other silent victims the strength to come forward. I find hope in what seems to me to be a cultural shift, both in the church and in society at large, in the US, in France, and in Norway. And you can see it in social media. You know, I found recently new hope for discovering that in faraway Norway, where I live, there's an organization that in many ways is a replica of Grace. It's called the Resource Center for Against Violence and Sexual Abuse in Christian Context. And we had our first meeting, our joint meeting with Grace and the local churches around here and the center to create an awareness among the pastors of these and the leaders of the churches around here. I find hope in the perceptible increase in awareness of the reality of the abuse in the church. It seems to me that it's no longer okay to deny, to ignore, or to minimize it. So I'm privileged to participate in a change because Grace, to me, is an agent of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Emmanuel has been just an incredible resource to all of us at Grace. He joins us on our regular leadership team meetings and has been a voice of wisdom and reason that has been beyond compare. So thank you very much, Emmanuel. We're here tonight talking at all about the work of Grace because back in 2004, 19 years ago, Boz Chividjian had a vision, and that vision came to fruition. Boz is no longer the executive director at Grace, but he still is on our board, and we benefit greatly from his experience on our board. Boz, you have seen more than most people I know. Where do you find hope?
Well, thank you, Pete. What a privilege to be here. I mean, I'm always amazed when I think back in the summer of 2004. There was a group of us, small group of us, including Emmanuel and Victor, who met in the back office, very cramped office of Dr. Diane Langberg up in her office outside of Philadelphia. And we were talking about the need of starting an organization to address this issue. We had no idea what we were doing. We just all had a passion. We all had a certain expertise, and we all had a love for Jesus, and we're so troubled, that's probably an understatement, by the fact that the church didn't seem to be a place of refuge. In fact, it seemed, based on our own experiences and professions, to be, in many cases, a place of trauma. And I thought, I'd grown up a Christian, and I thought, that's not the Jesus that I know. That's very foreign to me. Why is this so common? And so we got together, and here we are. Pete, you said 19 years. I say almost 20. 20 years later, I have a lot more gray hair that you can't see in the dark, which is here we are 20 years later, and the question can still be asked, what gives you hope? And for me, so much gives me hope, but one of the first things that comes to mind when I think of what gives me hope are survivors. I have been privileged, I mean genuinely privileged, to meet and encounter abuse survivors from all over the globe who've had varying different experiences, who have crossed my path and have taught me so much. They survive, in my opinion, based on my experience, I have learned so much from those who sadly found that the church and faith communities were not a place of refuge, but a place of harm. And what survivors have taught me is that there is hope, there is a hope to keep learning. And when they keep showing me hope and keep teaching me, that empowers me. That empowers the Grace team. And what do we do when we get empowered through the lives of survivors? We then turn around and try and do our best as a team to empower churches, to understand these very complex issues, to empower pastors who many of them have never heard of the word abuse in seminary, never heard of the term trauma in seminary, who have oftentimes really messed things up in their own church, even though some of them may have been trying to do the right thing. And it helps us to be empowered by survivors to then turn around and use what we've learned to empower churches to finally become a genuine place of refuge, a place of safety for children, a place of safety for adults who are vulnerable, a place of safety, not just safety, but of welcoming of those who have experienced some form of trauma, whether it's been inside the church or outside. The church should be a place where survivors and hurting people are running towards and not fleeing. But my experience, so much so in my last 20 years of working alongside of Grace, and even now as a practicing attorney, is that too many survivors are fleeing the churches. And when you hear their stories, and many of you are watching this right now, I get it. That you fled, by you fleeing, you saved your life. You gave yourself hope by getting out. But my hope is that through learning from the survivors that we're privileged to know, that we can be empowered again, then to empower churches to become a place of hope. And I would just say the other thing, or the other, when I think of hope as well as in these last 20 years, has been the Grace team. You know, when you do this work day in and day out, whether it's in Grace or whether you're an attorney who oftentimes is spending his day suing churches, it can get pretty dark at times. And you can sort of wonder, what is this Christianity anyway? And are there any quote unquote normal Christians? Because I'm encountering the worst of the worst. And it's those moments, it's oftentimes some of the most difficult moments that I'm struggling with. What is this Christianity? Are there any such thing as normal Christians, people who aren't abusive, people who actually care, people who actually reflect the Jesus that I've known and loved since I was 4 years old? And it's oftentimes on one of those dark, difficult moments that somebody from the Grace team will reach out to me for some unrelated reason. And I will be reminded again that, oh, good, not all Christians are wackadoodles, that there is a team of people that God in his kindness has allowed me to get to know, and they are my community. In many ways, they are my church. And I'm so privileged to be part of that village alongside this amazing team. And so they give me hope. They give me hope in my own faith, because there are many days that I need that hope. I desperately need that hope. And I'm so grateful for that. So as we think through moving forward, here we are tonight, every church empowered. Well, guess what? Churches cannot be empowered unless we can teach them and help them and give them the tools they need to be empowered. And we can't do that without the knowledge and experience and wisdom of the amazing survivor community. And so I just want to encourage everyone listening today, get involved with Grace. Whether it's, sometimes we do these Grace dinners in local cities where we bring together people and help introduce the community to Grace. But then there's something like this campaign. It's very simple. I mean, if I can go online and actually start a page, a fundraising page, and then shoot it out on social media and email it to my friends with the hope that even if just a portion of the people who see that not only give to Grace, but start their own pages. That's the beauty of this type of campaign. It can multiply. So you can start off with like 10 Grace team members, and in a week or two, we could have 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 different pages. And with each page, you're reaching into your respective communities. Not only are people giving to Grace, but just as important or more, they're learning about the work we're doing. And when they learn about the work we're doing, they so oftentimes come alongside us and inspire us and encourage us to move forward into the dark places. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for giving me hope.
Thank you so much, Boz. Lots of great wisdom from the person who started it all, who started Grace back nearly 20 years ago. Amazing. Lisa Oakley is another new board member with Grace, but she's not able to make it tonight. She's over in the UK where it is the middle of the night. So Lisa was not able to join us tonight. You may know Lisa. She and Justin Humphreys together have written the book, Escaping the Maze of Spiritual Abuse. Thank you so much for what you had to say, Boz. We miss you tonight, Lisa. Laura is the chair of the board of directors at Grace. She brings great wisdom, wonderful, wonderful advice and experience into that role. Laura, where do you find hope?
So when I was reflecting on these themes of courage and hope, I thought about the stories of the Christian community and what the generations now and to come, how they interact with those stories. And I think about how my own children in the years to come and down the road, what stories are they going to be able to remember and tell about courage and hope that they saw? And I know that many stories that survivors have experienced and tell don't involve that courage and that hope. And so, I think about how some stories that are experienced and told now are more like of cowardice and hopelessness instead. They experience harm instead of hope. And so, I think about what do we want the Christian community's relationship with courage and hope to be, so that we can start telling a different story, so we can help being a different kind of community for those who are vulnerable and hurting. And so, I wonder, what does this courage and hope look like? And really, as Boz and others have already said, we need really only to look to those who have lost so much in this quest for truth and for safety and for justice to know what courage looks like. I can think of those who are weeping still over that lost sense of belonging, their lost faith, and even in a sense of untethered identity after losing their community of faith. I think about those who have left behind all that seemed dear because all became unsafe. And to those whose bodies kept the story until their words could finally tell it. And when they named that harm, they experienced rejection and betrayal. But I also think about those who work tirelessly to bring the mission of Grace to bear, the staff at Grace, the fellow board members, those in the Christian community who speak out, who support, who listen, those who listen still and holding the pain of the vulnerable with curiosity and compassion. I think of those who have sacrificed the control over the outcome and the comfort of the familiar to see themselves more clearly, being willing to take a look at how did we play a role? How did our community not do the right thing, not have a godly response? I think about those who allow themselves to truly see the hurting and be willing to feel that ache instead of offering cruelty and callousness. And I think about those who allow their hearts to be broken instead of empty for those who have been harmed and those who are seeking that refuge, as Boz described. I think of those who have answered the cries of the vulnerable with cries of repentance, lament, and steps of change. We've seen even this week in our own work, church and faith communities who have shown courage in that way. And in so doing, offered hope to those watching and waiting. And I think of those who embody Emmanuel, God with us, in their care and kindness and bringing relief and safety to the survivors in their midst, and to those who are waiting to see, what does a glimpse of God really look like? What does Christian faith really mean? I can't help but think of church and faith communities across the US in Washington State, Maryland, Kentucky, and Wisconsin who had the courage to self-evaluate, to enlist the services of grace, to respond with humility, to seek out the truth, because God loves the truth and wants it to be known. And I think of those who are being proactive and bringing in safeguarding services, communities in Indiana and Maryland and Texas and California and Kentucky and Canada and El Salvador, and churches and communities and organizations all over the world who are seeing the need to prevent and learn how to respond well. And I think about the hope that brings to us, around not just how do we respond to things that already have happened, but how do we prevent those things from happening? How do we show that that we're proactively caring, and putting and prioritizing the safety of our most vulnerable in our midst? I think, spanning a range of so many denominations, of so many Christian communities, and thinking about how even 20 years ago, these conversations weren't happening at this level, to this amount of publicity, and just noticing that I think we're only going to be talking more about it, which means that we're only going to be, hopefully, hearing more truth, seeing more light, and hopefully seeing more courage in the process. But especially in thinking about those who have been harmed in Christian communities, I just wanted to just read the last few words of a blessing from KJ Ramsey, who is a fellow clinician, but also an author, and she talks about courage. So for those of you who have experienced harm in the name of God, no matter where you are, I'm praying that may your story find the safe harbor in the presence of people who will both honor your vulnerability and your resilience. And so thank you for your own courage. And I hope that the work of grace and the work of those who are bringing this mission to fruition will bring hope to you. So thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for supporting the work of grace. And as we think about how we can go about engaging with this Every Church Empowered campaign, Pete, tell the folks who are here joining us this evening exactly what does Every Church Empowered do? What does it offer? What will it be able to do for churches on the margins, for folks who need the services of safeguarding with grace?
Every Church Empowered is a relatively flexible fund. One of the key things that Every Church Empowered allows us to do is when a church calls us up, or when a survivor calls us up and they need to talk, something has happened and they need to know what to do. The Every Church Empowered funds allows us to just talk to them, to take whatever time a survivor needs, to take an hour with the church and talk through what do we do in these situations. In the United States, the average Protestant church has an operating budget right around $75,000. They don't have a whole lot to spare when it comes. Now, you must be willing to pay the price to prevent events from happening. You must be willing to bear some of the cost of entering into the experience and carrying the effects of a person who's been harmed, especially when that harm has come in the faith community. But a church that has an operating budget that is that small, or a church, we've had, for example, churches with 20 people that are meeting in a home reach out to us and ask us, what do we do? Often those churches don't have a budget that would allow them to have a consultation that would allow them to bring in a high-level training, such as one that's been developed by Mike, our director of safeguarding, and presented by Mike or Maureen, our lead safeguarding specialist. And the Every Church Empowered funds allow us to provide those services to meet that need for churches who may not have those resources, those funds available. So it may be a policy review for a church that otherwise could not afford it. It may be a training for a church that otherwise could not afford it. And it is just taking time, talking with, and doing consultations for survivors and churches who are trying to do the right thing. When we look at this back in 2 years ago, when we did a fundraiser for the Every Church Empowered fund, we were just starting this fund and we didn't know what to expect. But 2 years ago, we raised $100,000 to go into this fund, and most of those funds have now been used. We've done over 400 free consultations. We've been able to reduce the cost of training and policy review for 29 churches. We've been able to help survivors who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend a training. We've been able to help 30 survivors attend trainings on trauma and understanding what trauma is and how that understanding of trauma impacts how we interact with each other. So those funds have gone a long way into meeting these consultation needs, into meeting a lot of these other needs. But that fund is just about out of money.
And with our goal of wanting to raise $100,000 this year, this fall, in the next 2 weeks, basically for Every Church Empowered, what we're hoping to raise is $100,000, because with that we'll be able to provide up to 400 free consultations to churches and survivors. Also 200 discounts for online training, or 100 discounts for comprehensive safeguarding training. So with the $100,000, we're able to spread it out in a lot of different ways to provide means for these churches, survivors, and organizations to find what would be the best fit for the services that Grace can offer, and to be able to spread that out among many different organizations, institutions, churches, and survivors. So $100,000 allows us to spread that out quite a bit and offer those discounts in a way that makes our services affordable. And like you said, what is the cost of courage, right? It can be high, but we want to make it something that is feasible, especially for those who are in smaller communities and unable to provide the typical amount. And then, Pete, in addition to what it's about, how can people get involved? I know we've talked a little bit, Boss said a little bit about setting up a fundraising page and multiplying, and, we do have this goal. How can people help? How can people get involved?
Well, there's really two key ways that people can get involved. The first way is to set up a fundraising page. The board members that are on this program today have set up fundraising pages. Many of the staff at Grace have set up fundraising pages. The idea behind a fundraising page is that you create this page and you describe why the work of Grace is important to you. It may be that you've grown up in an abusive church. It may be that you've seen the toll that this takes on a person's life, but you make it your page and you decide what information you want to put on there. And then you share it by email, on social media, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or whatever other form of social media you might use, and you share the fundraiser that you have set up. People then are able to donate to your fundraising page, and those funds will go to Grace, will go to the Every Church Empowered Fund. So that is one way that people can help, by setting up your own fundraising page. There's an additional way. If you perhaps don't have time to set up that fundraising page, or you're concerned about setting up a fundraising page, then you may be able to give directly to Grace. go ahead and see on the page who is already doing fundraising. Laura has a fundraising page. Emmanuel, everyone here on the screen has a fundraising page. And you'll be able to see who those people are that have a fundraising page. If there's something that somebody said that was especially meaningful to you tonight, donate to that person's fundraising page. You can donate to any of the fundraising pages that you see there, and in so doing, have that donation go to the Every Church Empowered Fund. And that allows us, again, to provide those consultations, to provide that training, to provide the policy review to churches and to survivors.
So folks can sign up to fundraise. They can share their fundraising pages on social media or via email and solicit other people to join them in setting up pages or to donate. And then if that's not something that you feel that you can do right now, you're welcome to come to the fundraising page directly and donate to one of the fundraisers that are there. Pete is in the lead right now on fundraising. So if you wanted to donate to someone else to even it up, that would be fine. but Zane is putting the email in the chat for anyone who needs assistance on setting up a fundraising page, or if you have questions about giving, whether to this fundraiser or in any other capacity, please feel free to reach out to Zane at netgrace.org. He's also happy to help you walk through your fundraising page, right?
Zane's amazing.
All right. He is. Shout out to Zane and to the entire staff of Grace who work tirelessly as a team in such courageous ways. We're grateful for each of them. And we're grateful for each of you participants who are with us this evening, who joined us to hear more about the stories of hope and courage, to hear more about this Every Church Empowered campaign. And we're so excited to partner with each of you in bringing more hope to the Christian community and to survivors. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye now.
When I'm clinging to your light, you will make the darkness bright. For you